I now want us to take note of these following dates, and the things I would now say. Preserve them as I present them. It's going to lead to something so we can understand it properly. 400 years was the period for which the slave trade lasted. 400 years! Did you hear? Just imagine the extent of wickedness. They were selling human beings. The Obas and slave merchants were selling their own Yoruba glory. They were selling the best of their own goodness, because the buyers wouldn't buy what is not of the highest quality. 400 years of selling human beings. Macaulay in 1835 brought his evil proposals. His ideas of replacing reality with illusion. His brainwashing ideas. Ideas of replacing truth with falsehood. Ideas of throwing people into darkness and bondage. He brought these ideas in the year 1835. The British colonizers, after the centuries of slave trade and pretending to be friends with our people, would come wanting to actually colonize our land. They brought fakery to us. Meanwhile, they already knew what evil plans they had in mind. Remember that Macaulay had spoken earlier in 1835, so the British colonialists already knew what they were going to do to us and to our land. They already planned it. Despite knowing what they were going to do, they still kept studying our people, not rushing to carry out their own evil plans. They kept on with the deception of being trade partners. Both parties were deceiving one another. By the time it came to the year 1851, they came out with carrying out their evil plans. That was where they actually started colonization. They didn't carry it out in one fell swoop. They were executing it piecemeal, gradually, bit by bit. They started their colonial activities, yes, in 1851. They pursued it gradually, not all at once. The entire not-a-nation space called Nigeria was not all colonized together in one day. No, they were taking them and overwhelming them, overcoming them, in little areas one at a time. Ironically, they actually started from us and from our land, indigenous Yoruba people. In 1851, they started their colonialist agenda right from Yoruba land, because as a matter of fact, Yoruba happens to be the colonialists' greatest headache, because they believe that Yoruba is more advanced than themselves, the colonizers. So they started the colonization agenda from Yoruba people and Yoruba land. That was in 1851. By the time it was the year 1897, Flora Shaw, one of the colonialists, gave the name Nigeria to the space that came to be known by that name now. Think of it. The person who named a space as Nigeria in the year 1897, was she the one that had just created that space and the various peoples therein? It's obvious that she only gave a name to a space, a land area, and peoples there who already were in existence, which actually means that certain peoples, races, ethnic nationalities already existed there. That's the reason she could see them and decided to assign her own chosen nomenclature, her own chosen name, to them. Various peoples already existed there before she came. That's the obvious fact. The total collection of the territories, and each with its own identified people and population, is what they named Nigeria. It's important to note that point because certain people have a way of spinning stories about a certain Royal Niger company selling the space called Nigeria to some colonialists. For you to say that the space, the geographical spread, was sold means that a kind of trade took place. Remember that the colonialists came initially on trade basis before bringing in colonization agenda. However, the issue of Royal Niger Company has its own backroom details, the secret of which lies distinct apart. But it was still a part of colonization. Because, think of it, where were you? After all, you have your own country elsewhere in another part of this world. So, how come you came to the lands and territories of other peoples? The territories of peoples different from your own ethnic people, and you claim to be buying and selling other people's lands? How come? IYP, you can now see the great evil that the so-called Obas did. You can now see the stupidity of those who believe that their ancestral history started in 1897, when Flora Shaw named a certain space as Nigeria. What is Nigeria? Is it a country? You can now readily see that it is not a country. Flora Shaw, who gave the name Nigeria, I hope you know that what she named Nigeria is actually a space, an area, comprising several ancestral territories of several races, several distinct and different ethnic nations. This is because the whites, coming initially as traders, were trading with different ethnic nations, different races, and they ended up colonizing the different races, but doing it a little at a time. They started with the Yoruba and continued to, and with the other races and ethnic nations. The absence of unity among the Yoruba is the reason the colonialists overcame Yoruba land, because the colonialists actually took over Yoruba land one piece at a time. By the time they were doing all of this, the plan that they used was the very plan that Macaulay had stated back in the year 1835. You remember that Macaulay had said that the backbone of Africa should be broken, and all the other things he said, so that the British could truly dominate Africa. So now they had started that domination. In the year 1851, they were able to do this using their military weapons. Meanwhile, they had sold inferior and fake weapons to the Obas. By the time they brought their own superior weapons to take over the land, which of course meant that these colonialists were armed robbers and expansionists, thieves and criminals, because of their superior weaponry, plus the issue of disunity that existed among the people being invaded, and the enemies within among the people, enemies who worked and collaborated with the colonialists. It was so easy for the colonialists to overcome the people and the land. So, bit by bit, one place at a time, the colonialists kept conquering lands until they had a southern group of such conquered lands and another northern group of conquered lands along the line, and to make things easier for themselves, especially as the South was running at a budget surplus while the North still had a deficit, they decided to merge both together. By the year 1914, Lugard presented the proposal and was authorized by the colonial heads to merge the two different areas of their colonial administration, the North and the South. They had actually been two different colonial administrations. That was how both were merged, not for the interest of the native indigenous races and ethnic nations forced together. The colonialists cared nothing about that. Their only concern was to take the good things belonging to those races and peoples for themselves, the colonialists. They didn't even know what those various ethnic nations were. They kept taking away the resources of the people. The actual owners of the resources became poor and were slaves to the colonialists occupying their land. They could no longer access and use their own divinely given goodness and resources. Meanwhile, every race, every ethnic nation, on earth and in their own indigenous lands, know how to live their lives for their prosperity. At least we, the Yoruba, know how to live prosperously on our own land. Nobody needs to go invade other people's lands. So the colonialists put both the southern and northern groups of territories they had invaded and been administering separately together. And they then started using the name Nigeria for it, the name they had previously given to the entire expanse of land. So the merged entity was called Nigeria. They decided to continue with that name everything that Macaulay said, that they should replace what is African and break their backbone. All of those things were taken and executed, done. That was how Nigeria came to be. There's nothing they did not replace, Nothing. They replaced the living style of everybody. Remember, Macaulay said that the people's culture must be replaced. Their education system must be replaced. Replace everything. That was what Macaulay said. You remember that was what he said, don't you? So, everything by which we are identified, everything by which we know we are so-and-so race, so-and-so ethnic nationality, was wiped out, deleted. And they brought in their own, according to what Macaulay had said. Not only this, but also they promoted their own thing, which they brought in to replace what is ours. They promoted their own thing as being the good one, and this was where the so-called elite got their job description, to promote what is white, what is foreign, what is English-British, what is imperialist, above what is African, above what is Yoruba. It was a contract job given by the colonialists to the so-called elites to execute among their own people. So, the elites accepted that contract job. And from there came all the terminologies that came to describe the lifestyle of the so-called elite. Terminologies like Alakowe, Ajebota. God have mercy. The elite presented themselves as well as whatever is foreign as better. Meanwhile, they know it's a lie. I hope you know it's an illusion. I hope you know that what the white man brought, what the colonialist brought, is falsehood. You so-called elites, go and read again what Macaulay said. Remember, he said that they would use falsehood to replace the truth. He practically said, take the truth from Africans and replace that truth with falsehood, and they would even see it as good because it's coming from a white man. You can thus see, you elites, what trick was played on you right there. You can there see that you are the hired contractor, hired by the imperialist, the colonialist, to handle and to execute the job of replacing the truth and the reality of our people and of our identity, replacing it with the illusion that the white man brought to our people, our race, the Yoruba. The colonialist used you. Apart from generally using the enemies within, the colonizer used you, the elites, and you didn't even know you were being used. Because what the colonizer brought and established among us, and which we thought was better than what we originally had, you elites were the ones who promoted and did the work to facilitate that replacement of values. Because, for instance, you are the ones that wouldn't speak our native Yoruba language. The English language had been used to replace your own native language. You are the ones that promoted the system that meted out physical punishment to children who spoke their own native Yoruba language, which they dubbed vernacular. You are the ones that wouldn't wear Yoruba traditional wares, but rather put on a tie even in the hot sun. They would wear tight trousers, which itself is a deliberate design by the enemy to attack the fertility of the men. It's part of the many things they came up with and put together for just one purpose: to wipe out everybody. This is because they really covet, greedily, extremely greedily, what Africa has. If they could do something by which all Africans could be evacuated out of Africa, and for them whites to come in, they would do so. You elites are the ones that are so crazy about your food culture of butter and bread. The reason the term Ajay butter came to be. They wouldn't consume pap as food. They wouldn't eat akara. They would openly detest the very suggestion of it. They can't eat monin and various other very nutritious foods. Doesn't God, who made the knowledge and preparation of those foods for different peoples in their various ethnicities, doesn't he know how he created humanity? Doesn't he know which food type is good for each particular ethnic group and in their own specific environment? But the elite condemn all of this, condemned all our practices, culture, lifestyle. They condemned everything and then replaced it to the point that people do not generally remember anymore what our own ways of life and culture really are. But despite all this, God did good to us indigenous Yoruba people by preserving for us the very people that the elite refer to as bush people, farm people, Arauco. God preserved them for us, the very people who are despised by the elite and who are considered illiterates. These Arauco, so-called, are now the ones that God has used for us, to bring us out of the evil promoted by the elite. Because these so-called Arauco are the ones who, over time, over the decades, have maintained our culture. They are the ones that have retained our culture. They are the ones promoting our culture because they care nothing about westernization. They still speak our Yoruba language. They still maintain our traditional practices, females kneeling down to greet elders, males prostrating, etc. These otherwise despised people still practice all of our culture and traditions. God preserved them for a time like this, for a day like this, so that we can return to our origin, our source, because whoever does not return to her source will perish. And the colonialists, working through the so-called elites, had prior to now taken us on the journey to perishing, the journey to destruction. Indigenous Yoruba people. Are you getting it? Are you understanding these things? Can you see how any foundation that is laid functions? When the colonialists forced together various ethnic nations who have nothing in common, not understanding each other's language or culture, for whose interest was that forced union? Only for the interest of the white man, the colonizer, the imperialist. The people were mandated to speak English language, overriding their own native ancestral language. I keep repeating it, that those of you who say you are the government of the not a nation entity called Nigeria, go to your Senate or House of Representatives and just for one day decide not to speak English while having proceedings. Let's see how any proceedings would ever be possible. Why are you afraid to carry out that simple test of your fake nationhood? That's just a little test, isn't it? What does it cost you? Try it and see if you are one or you are not one. Carry out that simple test, so it can become very clear to you that God, who created all, knows what He's doing by creating us differently as He has done. He's the one who created us differently. If there's no other evidence to show that Nigeria is not a nation, that simple test would show clear evidence that you are not a nation. Go and find out the definition of a nation. You are not a nation. That anybody thinks Nigeria is a nation, which it is not, is part of what the colonizer said they would do to you, replacing truth with falsehood. That's why you would believe that falsehood of calling Nigeria a nation. That's the falsehood the colonizer has handed to you to embrace. But in respect of which God has now shown the truth to us, indigenous Yoruba people, and which you too ought to understand this truth. Surprisingly, though, some insane Yoruba people are there among them in the Nigerian setup. They are insane, saying that they would die inside the poverty and the suffering that the colonizer has established and named Nigeria. Right now, it's obvious that they don't know yet that what the colonizer set up and named Nigeria is another name for poverty and suffering. They are concerned about their own personal benefit. In colonial Nigeria, the colonizers had so much money generated from the southern part, which is where Yoruba land is. They had so much money generated that they didn't only use it to offset the deficit in the northern part, they also had so much extra that it was used to run their own British government back in their own homeland. That was how much abundant the revenue generated from our own part of their colonized Nigeria was. That's why the colonizers' covetous greed still lingers till now, and they haven't backed off. They have stayed put everywhere that they went to carry out their colonial theft. Meanwhile, they see the poverty inflicted upon the indigenous population in those places, the very poverty they had planned to inflict upon them. But it doesn't bother the colonizer one bit. They continue impoverishing the people. The real owners of the resources are suffering, and all kinds of effects of poverty and suffering are happening to them. The colonizers don't budge. What they had said from the beginning is what they still stand by, to truly dominate the native inhabitants, as Macaulay had proposed. By the year 1960, they came with the fake independence, which they fraudulently gave to those leaders of the supposedly now independent Nigeria. It was top-notch fakery, top-notch scamming. It was independence without freedom. The supposedly independent entity and the various peoples still did not have the authority to do as they wished. The Constitution laid down by the colonialists and every arrangement laid down by them were the things still being operated by the supposedly independent entity. Nothing else. The judicial system inclusive and every other thing that the supposedly independent entity was operating are all owned by the colonizer. There's nothing you do, nothing in your daily existence that is not done as exactly laid down by the colonizer, because they had previously uprooted your own original aboriginal lifestyle. They had taken away from you your culture, and they replaced it with their own. So when the colonizer supposedly granted independence to their Nigeria, in 1960, it was independence without freedom. The supposedly independent peoples still did not have authority over what belonged to them and has belonged to them ever before they were colonized. Even at the supposed independence, they were still using and following the structure, the system laid down by the colonizer. How does that constitute independence? How does that constitute freedom? How does that constitute truth and reality? By the year 2014, the 100-year amalgamation of the South and the North to form Nigeria, and which amalgamation was done in year 1914, expired. The amalgamation was a forced joining together of unlike entities that had nothing in common. It was contracted to last for 100 years because the colonizers themselves knew that it was impossible for such a forced union to last forever. They knew it was just a mere human arrangement by themselves, the colonizers. Only what God established can last forever. That's the reason they gave the amalgamation a definite time frame, a definite time span, 100 years. So it had an expiration date, year 2014, meaning that by the year 2014, the colonial arrangement comes to a definite end. Meanwhile, the colonizers' thought, reasoning, and expectation was that by the time the amalgamation would expire in 2014, they, colonizers, would have succeeded in carrying out all that they wanted to do, and would wipe out the entire peoples and populations of the colonized area, and those races and populations would no longer be in existence. So they gave the amalgamation a time span of 100 years, believing that by the end of that period of time, they would have achieved all their plans. They intended wiping out everybody, including the enemies within among the native populations, the very people that the colonizers themselves had used against their own fellow natives, including all the collaborators with the colonizer and everything they had used in colonizing the people. Everything and everyone was to be wiped out, because the colonizers' intention was to take over all those lands wholesale. They were so greedily addicted to possessing and claiming ownership of the entire land space. More so, Yorubaland. They wanted our land so badly, until now that God has blinded them with regards to Yorubaland and has burnt them off. So, in the year 2014, the amalgamation done by the colonialists expired. That is, an expiration officially came to the exploitation of the peoples and of their lands by the colonizer. In other words, the purpose of the amalgamation is no more. Initially, the fake independence granted in 1960 had actually reduced the power of the colonizers themselves, a manifestation of the maxim that the evildoer would end up hurting their own self. By the time, therefore, when the amalgamation later expired, there was nothing more the colonizer could do. That, therefore, is why the not-a-nation entity called Nigeria is pure illegality. Everything they are doing there is illegal. It's pure illegality, I tell you. Their constitution is an illegality. Everything about them is an illegality, because it is not the original existence of the people that were colonized there. Rather, everything about Nigeria is what the enemy, the colonizer, had used in replacing the original reality of the various indigenous nations that became colonized. Then, by the time God came to do his wonder for us, the indigenous Yoruba people, IYP, he did for us our Declaration of Independence on November 20th, 2022. The Declaration of Independence was the definite statement, loud and clear, from the indigenous Yoruba people that we are no more participating in the already expired Nigerian colonial arrangement. We are returning to our pre-colonization, pre-amalgamation existence as indigenous Yoruba people, a sovereign people on our own ancestral land. The Declaration of Independence was done not even minding the fact that as indigenous people and as a sovereign people who also have the right to self-determination, we do not need to explain ourselves to anybody before activating our sovereignty. Europeans themselves, whenever they want to activate self-governance among themselves, they only do so via the right to self-determination and nothing more. Their desire for self-determination is part of what gave rise to the First World War. They said, enough is enough, and would no longer allow themselves to be subjected under various empires. They later felt that the arrangement for self-determination was not yet strong enough, and that's the reason Hitler was able to come up again with his expansionist program, which therefore led them to fighting the Second World War. They refused Hitler colonizing them, the same colonization that they themselves had done and were doing in Africa. That action of refusing Hitler's expansionist program and colonizing agenda was what led to fortifying and strengthening the self-determination. Right? So they actually set up the self-determination principle to deal with issues among themselves. They never imagined that Africans colonized by them would later use that same self-determination principle to become free. But for us indigenous Yoruba people, look at what we've got at our disposal. We have more than just the self-determination principle, which is God's own goodness to us. So, by the year 2022, God established the Declaration of Independence of indigenous Yoruba people. He established that foundation. God himself said, enough is enough. Now, indigenous Yoruba people, begin your journey home to reclaimed sovereignty. In that same year, 2022, precisely on December 18th, we did our reclamation notification, which actually was the only mandatory exercise we ought to do. By that reclamation notification, we informed the Nigerian authorities on our Yoruba ancestral land and who were occupying our properties. We informed them that we want to come take over control of our properties. You have been tenants on our land and properties. We are the landlord, and now we are here. We need our property. Every system being used in Nigeria is the colonizer's arrangement, the electoral system, and everything. And because they were all established by the colonizer, the colonialists are always watching and superintending over what goes on in Nigeria, wanting to be sure that their colonialists' interest and agenda are being fulfilled, and ensuring that their internal errand boys are doing their expected duties. They monitor everything so well. And if they have any reason to believe that any of their errand boys is misbehaving, they would remove you and replace you. If they don't kill you, they would do something else. Every person that ever attempted to change what they had set in motion since the proposals of Macaulay, every one of them was killed. especially when the 100-year amalgamation had not yet expired. They killed them. They exterminated them. So, let everyone know that we indigenous Yoruba people, IYP, notified Nigerian authorities. We notified those that they positioned on our ancestral territory, the Illusion governors, and all others. We notified them. By April 12, 2024, we then did the Proclamation of Sovereignty of Democratic Republic of the Yoruba, DRY, the proclamation of our government. Concerning that, you are not required to do anything other than to announce and to establish it, because we had gradually been getting things done over time. There had been a definite journey towards that event, supported by documents and everything we had variously been doing, officially, both diplomatically as well as administratively, and which were all successful and made to proper by God Himself, which is God's goodness to us. Note that God Himself is the one who helped us to do all these things, which I am here recounting to the hearing of indigenous Yoruba people. It's not by our knowledge or power, it's God that did it for us. The announcement was the proclamation. On that same day, April 12, 2024, we established the government, Democratic Republic of the Yoruba Provisional Government, headed by Mobolaji Olawale Akinola Omokore. Thus, we completed our process. It's completed. As indigenous Yoruba people, it's complete. We have completely done and fulfilled the entire process. Nothing more remains to be done. However, because of the reaction of the Nigerian government, after we had completed the process, the enemy thought we would respond to the violent action of the Nigerian government with violence as well. They didn't know that God was leading us step by step. Rather than respond to Nigeria with violence, we kept our cool and we watched, because we knew that by their violent action, they had shot themselves in the foot. Because how would illusion override sovereignty? We are indigenous people. But Nigeria is a brainwashing arrangement by the enemy, the colonizer. So, how would a later human arrangement in 1914, how would it override a sovereign people that had existed from the beginning of time? But because of the lie they had been told, those who dwell within that falsehood think that they've got a way out. How can you have a way out? You that was arranged and named only in the 1800s, compared with a sovereign people, an ethnic nationality that has been since the beginning of time. The process was complete on April 12, 2024. But because of the madness they embarked upon, because they had been so brainwashed in their Nigerian enclave, and therefore they, being so ignorant, God told us to be patient by 2025. God said, without fail, it cannot be changed. You will possess all that is yours. We shall possess our possession in this year, 2025. All our territory, given to us by God Himself, our land, our resources, we shall take possession of. Between 2024, when we did the establishment of our government, and now, Nigeria has stolen so much money, taken so much money, that belongs to us. You have been taking our money. You have been collecting our money from our own people on our land. You have been collecting the money revenue from our resources. You have been taking away our resources, and you have been selling them to outsiders, to colonialist oppressors, especially the latest oppressors, China, which pretends to give you loans, whereas they know that you are demonically corrupt. China knows that you don't know what you are doing, but it continuously gives you loans so that they can come saying they want to claim the collateral, thus claiming land. You, China, are a modern-day imperialist. You are a modern-day colonialist. Why are you giving loans upon loans to Nigeria, and you are asking for collateral, so that you can come later to claim the collateral? But meanwhile, you claim to dislike imperialists. You claim to dislike colonialists. You claim to dislike the operations of the West. You are among those who lead anti-West sentiments. You are among those who lead anti-colonialist activities. You, China. Yet the same you, China, are the one giving loans to Nigeria in exchange for collateral, for the purpose of taking land. God is angry with all of you. The things I have proclaimed against you, China, cannot change. It's exactly like that. It doesn't change. It's God's authority. Have you now realized, indigenous Yoruba people, that we need to open wide our eyes and we need to exercise intuitive perception and never again allow them to take from us the good thing that God has now done for us? They must not be allowed to return to take us into slavery on our own land, on our own property. We must not again allow a situation where nobody is enjoying the benefit of all the good things that God has done for us. The colonizers have only been giving crumbs to their internal collaborators. But now God has done the good recovery for us, but some of you think you can question it. It is fulfilled in this year, 2025, that does not change. Whatever plans you may think you've got is destroyed and burnt by the power of God. The hosts of heaven have pulled down all your plans. God, who is the I Am, has destroyed your plans. They will never, ever be fulfilled. That's how it is. It doesn't change.